Hey everybody, it's your good buddy Spider with another episode of the show. Courtesy of LTATM.net. Let's talk about the madness. That's the website that I use to coordinate everything that I do in my professional life. All funneled through one main source. Now I'm recording this a couple hours later than I normally would have, so I've already had a drink or two. So we're going to try to get through this without me being a little bit too off in the weeds, so to speak. And, yeah, we're back for another episode. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to be doing what I do for you fabulous folks out there. We are continuing to grow in all areas. Got great listenership. As you can tell, I said I'd already had a drink or two. Great listenership on the podcast itself, as well as great views and subscribes on the YouTube channel. We're really growing in leaps and bounds with the YouTube channel. I expect we will probably hit monetization on the YouTube channel by the end of the year. I expect. So that's great, and I have to thank you everybody for paying attention, I guess, to me. What do we got to talk about? It's been crazy weather. You know, I always got to talk about the weather. It's a thing. Old guys like me, we got to talk about the weather. Here in Ohio, it's the summer weather has finally kicked in. I've got a couple air conditioners in. One in the main bedroom because she needs it, and one for my daughter's room. I'm not really a big fan of air conditioning myself. I would rather just be warm. I don't know. I'm kind of a weird physiology as far as air conditioning goes. It causes me more harm than good. But it's been getting upwards into the 80s as far as Fahrenheit goes. And yeah, it's been raining a lot still. It's still been just constant rain. Every couple days it's just rain. It's just maddening the amount of rain we've had. But I guess it's good for the garden. You know, that's not really my area, but I guess it's good for that anyway. So last episode, we talked about my schedule, what I do on a daily basis, typically, and that, you know, that's subject to change sometimes depending on what I've got going on. But typically, that's my schedule every day. So today is a little different. We're going to delve a little bit farther into the past. We are going to delve into me, I guess, in a introspective, metaphysical kind of way, I guess, nostalgic kind of way, and we're going to follow my beginnings from a child on up to today. More or less. We're not going to go through every excruciating detail and every embarrassing detail, because there's a few things that are kind of like, oh, I don't really want to talk about that. That was not the best time in my life. But we're going to talk about we're going to go through a lot of it. Just to give you some background on what my life evolved from, I guess you could say. Also, don't forget, before I get too far into this, that you can go to, on LTATM.net, LTATM.net, there's a section, there's a page for the web store, and you can buy yourself a t-shirt, or a mug, or a shower curtain, or a poster, or a sticker. All kinds of stuff are up there, and it's all custom made. It's made to order. You can get haikus on the shirt from my Haiku with Spider regular YouTube short series. You can get a shirt with my face on it if you want, which why wouldn't you? And various other things there. So definitely go check it out. I'd appreciate it. It would really help me out if you bought a shirt or two for your family. For your nice family, all walking around with my face on them. So let's go all the way back. Let's go all the way back to 1983. 1983. Athens, Ohio. I don't remember anything of that. Probably because I was just recently born. I wouldn't remember much of that. But Athens, Ohio, I believe the hospital was called Obliness something or other. I've been there since, and I'll get to that in a minute. Not, at this point in my life, but I had to go there for something, and we'll get to that. But Obliness, I believe it was called, and my parents lived in Athens, Ohio, because that's where my dad was going to college at the time. There was I think it was Ohio State, Kent State, something. I don't remember what it was called. You're gonna have to forgive me on some of these details because it's gone in and out over the years, and some of it I assimilated, some of it I didn't. But he was going to medical school. He was going to medical school in Athens, Ohio. My dad, for the early part of my life, was a surgeon. He cut people open for a living, took out various things that needed to come out, stitched up things that needed to be stitched up. That's what he did. He was a sawbones. He was that kind of thing. And you might think, oh, well, medical family, you must have grown up with pretty good money, right? You must have had a pretty comfortable upbringing. No, because it takes a while, especially at the time, it took a while to get established in that field. You couldn't just go in, do it, and then make a ton of money. Plus, you had things, as time went on, you had malpractice insurance rear its ugly head. And I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but when my dad eventually retired from surgery and just went to being a general practitioner, where he's just a doctor in an office and he tells you what's wrong with you and gives you a prescription or refers you to the hospital or whatever, right? He was paying the equivalent of $200,000 a year in malpractice insurance. And you might think, how is that possible? I don't know. But that's how it was. We were pretty, before he retired from that, and even after that we weren't, supremely well off, but we were a little bit better. But before that, we weren't swimming in money. A 2-liter of soda pop was a luxury. We got pizza from a pizza shop on birthdays, and occasionally for birthdays we would get like Dairy Queen cakes and stuff like that. Fancy things that you'd only get for holidays. Okay? So, anyway, I didn't grow up swimming in money. I grew up relatively low income. Luckily for me, because I was the second child, I have an older sister and I have 2 younger sisters. So there's 3 sisters in me. But because there were 3 sisters in me, most of my clothes and things, if we had to get new clothes, mine had to be new. They couldn't be hand-me-downs because I couldn't wear... Well, I know it's 2025 and people can wear whatever. But things were more traditional in my house. It was more, male, female. And I know some people are going to be like, "Ooh, that's not good." Well, it's the 80s. It's a different time now than it was then. Let's not get hung up on about it. And I'm pretty solid in who I am. I'm a pretty solidly straight person, And I don't have anything against anybody of any whatever they are and whoever they want to be and whatever. We're not going to get bogged down with all that. But because I was the only boy out of the kids, I didn't have to get girls hand-me-down clothes. Okay? However you feel about that, it's irrelevant. So I tended to get newer stuff while my sisters had to have the hand-me-downs because they were all girls. But the earliest I remember clearly with regularity is when we lived, and we've lived in the same, I don't now, but my family has lived in the same location my entire life. My parents are still there. The house is different, but the location is the same. We moved into a house that had been my grandfather's. And it was, I guess, maybe it was the house that my dad grew up in. I don't know. But it was a farmhouse with some modern additions over time. And we had a patio and a few other things on it. And I have the most distinct memories of childhood from that and the house that followed, rather than any other place before that. I guess we lived in an apartment when I was first born, with me and my parents and my older sister. And I don't know if my next sister after that was there, or I think she came along maybe at the next house along with my youngest sister. My youngest sister is the only one that I remember being born, of a sort. I was not cognizant of my immediate youngest sister. She just always seemed to be there in my memory, right? She just always was there in my life, in my memory. But my youngest sister, I remember bits and pieces of when she was born and when she was an infant and when she was a toddler and things like that. I remember her always being my youngest sister. So, and that's a weird thing that memory does. Memory's kind of a strange creature, I suppose. It comes and goes, especially as you get older. But, so we lived in this house that had been my grandfather's, this old farmhouse. And that house burned in a house fire. I always remember it being 1992, but I think it was 1991. I think there's evidence that it was 1991, and my memory's kind of faulty. But I always believed it was 1992. But there was a fire that started in the laundry room. We had a bunch of extra, unwashed laundry that was kind of just hanging out in there, and for some reason it got too close to something. We had a natural gas heating system, something like that. I don't remember what it was. But the house burned completely. Gutted inside out. There was no saving it. There was nothing. We lost a few pets. We'd had cats at the time. The dogs we'd had all gotten out. But the cats, most of them, unfortunately, they passed in the house. So that was unfortunate. I remember a little bit about the cats, but not much. I do have a few faint memories of things in that house. I had my own room, and my sisters had their own room. My youngest sister had a little room for when she was very little. There was just it was almost like a closet, but she had a little bed in there and things. And then when she was old enough, she moved into the larger room. It was the largest bedroom in the house, and the three girls were in there, and I had my own little room next door, and my parents had their room. I remember I had a little closet. I had a waterbed. And you're gonna go back to the beginning of the episode and say, wait a second, you said you didn't grow up with a lot of money. How did you have a waterbed when you were a kid? I had a race car waterbed. And it was probably not as expensive as some people might think, because it was like one of those race car beds, but it wasn't made out of the big plastic pieces like they are now. It was made out of wood, like real thin fiber board, and then it had the waterbed mattress, and I could adjust it, and I always messed it up, and I always made it too hot and, screwed the thing up. You could adjust the temperature. My parents had a waterbed, because that was the thing in the 80s. It was kind of a big thing. It was like, get a waterbed, they're kind of cool, they're kind of sexy. Not for me as a kid, but for my parents. And so they got me a race car bed that just happened to be a waterbed. I remember whenever all the packages were dropped off, they were in big packages, multiple packages outside the house under the carport. We had a carport, not a garage, a carport. It was just a little partially enclosed with no door, just a roof and some slats on the side to hold up that roof, and it was the carport. And I remember the packages. Big, long packages that were all the parts to my new race car bed. So I had a waterbed, and that was pretty fun. My obsession with Transformers began at the time, because I had a few. I didn't have very many. When we went to the store and I wanted to get one, most of the time they said no. The few times my parents said, yeah, go ahead, it was a small one. It wasn't one of the bigger ones. I never had like the real large base building ones or the commanders or anything like that. I had little minions and stuff like that. And I went to school in Pennsylvania, because we lived in Pennsylvania. Now, the road that we lived on, and the road where my parents still live on, and please don't go and bother them. They don't, there's no reason to go out there, and just because I'm a big celebrity now, you don't need to go out there and bother my parents. But the road is the state line between Ohio and Pennsylvania. The road itself. So if you cross the road, you're in a different state. You go from Ohio to Pennsylvania, Ohio to Pennsylvania. We had two mailboxes, an Ohio mailbox and a Pennsylvania mailbox. And we had two phone lines, an Ohio phone line and a Pennsylvania phone line. And at one point, lightning struck the phone lines, and we lost one of them. I don't remember which one it was, if it was the Ohio or the Pennsylvania line. So from thereafter, we had to use long distance for something. Probably the Pennsylvania one, because I got in trouble for long distance for some of that, for trying to call my friends. But so we lived and that we still do. We live on the Pennsylvania side, and I was going to school in Pennsylvania. I went to school in Albion, Pennsylvania, which is about 10 miles, give or take, maybe more. I don't remember the exact 20 miles, something like that. And I was the first pickup on the bus in the morning, because I was the farthest away, and I was the last drop-off on the bus at the end of the day. So I had a long bus trip each time. And I remember my older sister was going to school, and my parents said, hey, you're going to get to go to school too. And I thought, oh, well, that might be fun, being a kindergartner, right? That might be fun. And I went, and I didn't really like it. And they came home, and my parents asked me, hey, well, how do you feel? How was your first day of school? And I said, well, it was okay, but I don't think I want to go again, because I'm naive. I was a little kid at the time. And they said, well, you have to. You're going to keep going to school. And they explained it to me that now that I was in school, I was in school. And I didn't like that. And I never quite got around to liking school in any fashion. I had a very complicated relationship with school. I never liked going to school. I didn't mind learning new things, but the things that they taught in school were not the things that I wanted to learn. And the way that the teachers behaved, I wasn't keen on, so I argued with them a lot. I got in trouble quite a bit. I had very few friends in school. It was a struggle. School was a struggle. All the way up from elementary up into high school, it was a struggle. I managed some strange popularity in high school because I was weird. I went out of my way to be kind of weird. I would do strange things and wear strange clothes on purpose just to be a goofball. Not because I was a class clown, but because I was like, I just want to be strange. Maybe people will leave me alone if I'm really strange. Because I was really angsty. I've had an anger issue ever since I was a kid. I was unreasonably angry as a kid, and I really don't know why. I've examined my childhood to the best of my ability as closely as I can, and I don't really see a reason why I was so angry with life. I don't know. I just was an angry kid, and maybe it's some depression or something that I've just got, some genetic thing that was in my brain the whole time. I'm much better nowadays. I'm pretty chill these days. I'm pretty calm. But I know how easy I can just flip a switch and just get to being grouchy and being kind of I'm a lot more in control of that kind of stuff now, because as you get older, you either let it take over and then you get yourself into a lot of trouble, or you work on trying to be a slightly better version of yourself. And I'm a lot better these days. Into my 20s I was still fairly angry, but it happens. So school was not a great thing for me. I didn't like it. But when I was in second grade, which I believe I was like 9 years old, something like that, 8 or 9. That's when we had the house fire, and the house completely burned. It was unsalvageable. We lost pretty much everything. Most everything that we owned. And all my toys were gone, everything. So we spent a few days, I don't remember the exact time frame. It might have been a few days, it might have been a week or two, it might have been longer than that, at my grandma on my mom's side. We lived at her house for a little while. And then we purchased a trailer that we parked next to the wreckage of the house. And it wasn't like a double wide, it was just a regular trailer. So I was a trailer kid, but we didn't live in a trailer park because there wasn't, it was an old farm, so there was wide open stuff all around. We had family in that immediate vicinity across the road, and still to this day are my aunt and uncle. Farther, the next house down the road are an aunt and uncle. And then the next house down there were family friends. And there was a girl there who was in my class, but she was actually my older sister's best friend throughout most of elementary school. So we would go there and hang out after school sometimes, waiting for my mom to get off work, because my mom was in the nursing field. Because, with my dad being a doctor, my mom being in the nursing field, right? It made sense. So we lived in the trailer next to the spot where they dug out the house. They dug out the old basement, the old foundation. I remember the basement of that house because it was wet. It was dripping. It was like a natural floor. It was always wet down there. And we had to go down there at least once because to shelter from a possible tornado. And which, didn't actually hit the house, so we were fine. But I remember memories of that being down there. But they dug all that out, and we contracted somebody to build a new house on the exact same spot as the old house. And that took a while. I did have video. I had video of the various stages of it going up. I have to get back with my younger sister, the middle sister, because she had access to the videos and she sent them to me. And then during one of my phone transfers, as you know, you got to get new phones throughout your life, I something got corrupted and it corrupted all the video, and I feel kind of grouchy about that because it was really good footage of me as a kid and of the house going up. It was pretty good history. But we built the house on the same spot. And it's a Victorian style house. It was modern. It was updated because it was the 90s at that point. And again, I had my own room. My older sister had her own room. And then the youngest two had their own room. And I liked my room. I liked my room a lot. I had a huge amount of closet space. My dad bought me a Nintendo system, which were still pretty new at the time. But it wasn't just a Nintendo, it was built into the casing of a TV. It was an RCA. No, it was a Sharp. It was a Sharp. It was a Sharp television, because Sharp had some kind of a partnership at the time with Nintendo, with NES. And they built in, like, you have those TVs with the built-in VCRs. This was a built-in game system for the original Nintendo games, which was pretty slick. It's still in my attic to this day. I've got it with me. And it worked the last time I turned it on. I don't know how well it works right now. It might just be a museum piece now. But it's up there. And I've never seen another one in person. I've seen people send me links about them and articles about them. And I've seen them on, like, eBay and things once in a while. But I've never seen another one in person, which is pretty cool. It's something unique. It was started me on my gaming journey. I actually got that when I was in the trailer, but I had it in the new house, too. And I had a pair of rabbit ears, and I could watch TV and watch movies I wasn't supposed to, because this was before. This was when cable was around, but you could still watch some of that stuff on regular television. We didn't have cable for the longest time. We didn't have it in the old house. We didn't have it in the new house because you couldn't really get it out there. It was really expensive and it wasn't feasible. They had to dig lines and all kinds of other stuff. It was out in the country. You didn't really get that kind of thing. But when we moved into the new house, not too long after, we got satellite TV. We got DirecTV, I think it was. I don't think it was Dish Network. I think it was DirecTV, which was only on the main TV in the main room downstairs. We didn't have that on every TV in the house. So on my personal TV in my room, I still had the rabbit ears, and I would watch what came on. And so we moved into there. We found out that the contractors had cut corners and done some things that they shouldn't have done. We went in a little bit early. We had a third floor and an attic. When people think, oh, a third floor and an attic, but it was neither one of those were ever finished. They weren't insulated, so that it was always ridiculously cold up there, and we never used it for much. Maybe some storage. And us kids sometimes would go up and play in there in the summer. But we were just too eager to get in, and then we found out that they had been cutting corners, and there were some various problems. And it's always had problems throughout the time that I lived there. We always had things we had to be fixing and repairing. And these days, I don't know, I think they've given up on some of the things, and they've just worked on, my parents have just basically worked on keeping the house structurally stable so that they can live there. I don't think they've worried too much about repairing the things that are long gone by now. It's been decades. But, so that was, I have a lot of fond memories of that house, about birthdays and various holiday things like Thanksgiving and stuff like that. And it was in that house that I started recording my first music, which was, went through a few different names before I settled on the Spider in the Hall project name. By 1999, I was using that to label my MP3 demos. And that was a 2-part process. I had a PlayStation 1. And I didn't have very many games. Because a lot of times, if we got a system, then the system would be expensive enough that I wouldn't really be able to get too many games afterwards, because, that's how the budget was. But one of the things I had was the MTV Music Generator. It was less a game and more... It was a digital audio workstation on PlayStation 1. It was preloaded with a whole bunch of samples, which you could rearrange and combine and make your own songs. And I did. And I figured out how to do like instrument sounds rather than just the loops of things, and really craft things. I still have a lot of it on memory cards stashed around here somewhere. I don't know if the memory cards are any good anymore. If I could transfer them off of that without having to load up a PlayStation 1, I would do that. But I don't know. I made my first songs. And I couldn't do anything with them, except that what I did was I had a VCR, and at the time the VCRs you could still record directly off of whatever was on the TV screen. Now they have tuners. Well, VCRs aren't even around anymore. But later on, VCRs had tuners, and they had things that prevented you from recording straight off the TV, because they didn't want you to do that, because, whatever. But I had it set up where I could record what I had on my screen. So I would load up my PlayStation 1, load up the tracks, and I would record the songs onto a VHS. And I sent a copy of the VHS, believe it or not, to... you remember a few episodes ago, we had one of the members of the writing team for Jack and V? That guy, his name is Rob. I mentioned it during that episode that I've known him most of my life. I sent him one of the original videotapes of my old songs. And I don't know if he still has it. I have no idea. If you're listening and if you still have it, let me know. It's a collector's item probably now. If it still even plays. I don't know. VHS is what it is anymore. And who has a VCR, to be honest. But that had some of the earliest demo tracks ever made. Some of them made their way to PC later. Because in the new house, again, we also had the family computer downstairs. And one day, while we were walking through our local Kmart store, and some of you might think, well, what's a Kmart store? It was before Walmart, and they're all gone now. There are no Kmarts. That's completely gone. Kmart was purchased by Sears, and then ran into the ground by the owner of Sears, who then ran Sears into the ground, and both companies are basically dead. So, that's how that goes. That's much farther into the future. But when I was a kid, Kmart was a thing. It was before Walmart came along, Kmart was a thing, and that's where we bought a lot of things. And they had a little bin of bargain computer software, which was mostly like doing your taxes. It was like tax software or math games or, little word games for kids, that kind of stuff. Nothing, no big deal. But I was just leafing through it one day while my mom and my sisters were looking for something else. And I found a PC copy of the MTV Music Generator, which would allow me, according to the back of the case, to export my tracks as MP3s. And MP3s were new. MP3s were a new thing for me. My dad had gotten me an MP3 player that was the size of... what can I compare it to? It was the size of a Pillsbury biscuit. I guess, for lack of a better comparison. It was big. It had a slot for a memory card, and the memory cards were big too. They were the size of a quarter, and they were very thin. And they could hold maybe they didn't hold gigabytes. They held megabytes. And not very many. I could fit maybe, 12, 15 songs on this at the time. But I had figured out how to rip CDs, how to pull music off of CDs, and how to burn CDs, and to make new CDs and make mixes. And I was a fiend. I was a CD mixing fiend when I was a kid. And this was pre-teen, early teen years. I went crazy making CDs. I still have a huge collection of burned CDs of just random mixes that I made that were special to me at any given time, depending on my mood. And I discovered online downloads. I discovered online piracy, and I'm not going to say I didn't. The FBI can try to come after me because there's no way they can check my collection at this point. You got to prove everything that I got isn't from a CD that I borrowed from somebody, which I'm going to plead the fifth about. Okay, so, but I downloaded music on a regular basis, whether purchased or otherwise. I'm not going to blow any smoke about it. And I got into Nine Inch Nails and started downloading all kinds of bootlegs and all kinds of things like that. But with the music generator program, I could generate my own MP3s, and I could share them online on MySpace. You guys remember MySpace? Technically, I guess it's still around. I guess it's still a thing. I don't know. I haven't been there in, who knows. I had an account there, and I was pretty regular about it. But, so I started making MP3s and handing them out to people, trying to get traction on things. And when I moved out, I took that computer with me because my sisters weren't really using it. And it had all my stuff on it because I had pretty much took it over. And it's still up in my attic now. I've gone through 4 computers since, 4 PCs, and it's still up there because I keep everything. And, but anyway, I grew up, I made music, it was the early days of the Spider in the Hole phenomenon. I was on some message boards, not very many. And in school, my senior year, I had basically given up. I hated school. I just wanted to be done with it. I wanted to be out. So I didn't worry about anything. My parents throughout most of my school year knew how smart I was because I'm a smart guy, and that's not a brag. I'm just saying I'm a smart guy. It happens. And so they were putting me in advanced placement classes and college prep classes and things like that because they knew they wanted me to make the most out of my intelligence, and I just was like, I didn't want to do it. I was struggling with it, not because I didn't understand the things, but because I didn't care. I've always said I'm too smart for my own good, which means I'm smart enough to be a smart person, but I'm also smart enough to mess it up. You know what I mean? I was my own worst enemy, and sometimes I still am. But I was moody, I was grouchy, and I didn't like people, I was antisocial, and so by senior year, I finally convinced my parents. I was like, I don't want to take these extra smart classes. I just want to take the classes that will let me graduate. Just let me get through. Because I had slowly, over the years, started slipping from A's all the time to B's and C's, and occasionally having worse than that. And they finally let me get away with it, and were like, all right, fine. Because they wanted me to graduate. And it was good. I don't know if they agreed with me that it needed to be on my terms or not, or they finally just gave in, and they were like, fine, whatever. But they let me take a bunch of classes that weren't very hard, that weren't very difficult. They didn't challenge me very much, but I didn't want the challenge at that point. I was done with it. I was like, oh, I just want to be done. Because I didn't like my classmates for the most part. I didn't like the teachers. I didn't like the environment. I just wanted to be finished. But I still wanted to be able to, get a job afterwards and be able to not be a deadbeat. So, so I graduated high school, I got the diploma and everything. I'm not a doofus. Not that anybody who doesn't graduate is a doofus. I don't want to imply that, but I got through. And then I spent some time I didn't know what to do. I was trying to find work. And I was arguing with my folks because it was one of those, well, if you're going to live here, you're going to live by our rules. And I was like, well, I'll just move then. So I was trying to focus on leaving. It was real tense at the time, and it was teenage angst. It was, I wanted to get out and do my own thing. So my grandfather, who was a fantastic person, my grandfather was one of the best people ever in life. He worked hard throughout his life. He never took anything for granted, and I miss him every day. I've got his picture where I can see it from here. I can look up right now. I am looking at it. It's got a picture of him, and in the article, it's got his obituary with it, which I'll get to. I'll get to that part. But in order to get work, I had to have my birth certificate. I don't remember why. That was so I could get my ID, my state ID, so I could work, because the jobs required you to have an ID. And I wasn't able to drive yet and this was a failing on my parents, and I'm not going to blame them and be mad at them. And I don't want anybody else to be mad at them either. I don't blame them to this day about it. I don't hold a grudge or anything. They didn't take me to learn how to drive because they didn't really have the time. And some people are going to be like, well, why couldn't they make the time? Why couldn't you get into driver's ed classes or something? Well, I don't, it was a time. Things were what they were. Okay? And so my grandfather, knowing I needed my birth certificate, but also knowing that I needed to, my head wasn't in the right spot. I didn't know what I was doing. So he said, hey, he lived in Kentucky. Him and my grandma, they lived in Kentucky at the time. And he said, hey, you come down, you spend a couple weeks with me, we'll do work. We'll work on projects and stuff. Because he worked in the town. He helped build things. He was the town maintenance person. He, all kinds of stuff. So he said, come down, spend a couple weeks with me. So I did. It was a great time. It was really an eye-opening time, and it helped a lot. And I helped build a new center, what was it called? Activity center for a church group out there. I helped build it. I wasn't very good with the tools because, I've never been great with tools. But I helped, and we did it. And on the way back from that trip, we stopped in Athens, Ohio, to pick up my birth certificate. So we got that, and got my ID and things, so I was able to work. And I started working at the same place that my older sister had worked previously. She worked at a restaurant in Conneaut, Ohio, which was the opposite side from the town in Pennsylvania where I went to school. It was the same amount of driving in the opposite direction in Ohio. She had worked there as a waitress or a server or whatever before she went to college. So I kind of had an in there. Put in a good word for me, So I got in there and I was a dishwasher. And as I was working there, there was an assistant manager and there was a cook who I got to know. And we started talking, and they were both looking out to get out of their living situations, and they knew I was trying to get out of my situations. They were like, hey, we got a handle on this, there's a duplex with half of it's open. Why don't we all just go in on that? And we each pay a portion of the rent, and we each get a room, and we do that. So we've got access to a kitchen, we've got wash and dryer, we've got everything we need. So I said, sure. So we did that. It was me and my dog, my little dog Maynard. His name was Maynard. Yes, it was. He was a great dog, and I miss him every day of my life. But we moved into this duplex with these other two guys, and I spent a good amount of time there. I worked at the restaurant until I got fired. It's the only job I've ever been fired from, and I deserved it. I'll say that. I deserved it. I said something I shouldn't have said, and I got fired. So, after that, I worked at the hospital that my dad worked at, or worked with. He was in his own little practice off on the side, but he was part of the hierarchy at the hospital. And I worked in the kitchen first, doing trays for patients and things, and doing stuff in the cafeteria. Then I worked doing floor maintenance, where I did waxing and stripping floors and that kind of stuff, which was fun. I really enjoyed that. Then hospital politics forced me to quit, and you may wonder, well, why would they force you to quit? You're just the guy who cleans the floors. But, there's a bunch of stories behind that, and I just want to say it's a terrible environment to work in medical if you have family that also work in medical. Not that the family was the problem, because they weren't. But it's like school. It's like school. People are catty, and people are the way they are. While I was working there, though, one of the really low points in my life happened, because while I was working there, I was in the emergency room. Not, I didn't have an emergency, and it wasn't busy, and I wasn't helping anything, because I didn't do that kind of work. I wasn't medically trained, But I was in between things that I was doing, in between tasks. And I was just chatting with some of the ladies who worked in there, some of the nurses. And I get a call. Well, we get a call. And they say, hey, it's for you. And I say, okay, that's weird, because, I didn't usually get calls. I thought it might be maybe my boss wanted me to do something. And it was one of my uncles, because one of my uncles also worked as part of the nursing staff in the hospital. And he says, hey, we're trying to get a hold of your dad. And I'm like, well, okay, I don't know. I mean, if he's not here, he's usually available. And they were like, well, we need to get a hold of him. It's really important. And I said, okay, well, let me see if I can call his cell phone. And my uncle's like, well, hold on a second. You just wait down there. This is going to concern you too. And I was like, I don't, okay. I didn't know what it was about. That was really ominous. So he comes down, and he tells me that my grandfather's dead. Because he was out on a trip, didn't feel good, pulled over, and then had a coronary event, and that was it. It was within seconds he was gone. And they couldn't get a hold of my dad. So I've told this story enough times, but every time I still get kind of broke up about it. So let me make sure I get through this. But so I called my dad. Well, I couldn't get a hold of him. I called my mom, because for whatever reason. So I called my mom, and I said, hey, where's Dad? And she said, well, he's in the bathroom. Because that's why he wasn't answering the phone. He's in the bathroom. What are you going to do? And she says, why? What's the problem? And I had to break it to my folks that my grandfather, who was my dad's dad, had died. And, and that was tough. That was a really tough situation for me. It put me in a bit of a spiral there. So I ended up having to go home early from that shift, and then maybe calling off 1 or 2 days after that. I was a pallbearer for the funeral. And I've been there since. I've gone back. It took me a lot of years, but I went back to visit the stone. I believe maybe last year. I think it was. And to see how everything around the area had changed. But, yeah. I still have a hard time. As maybe you could tell by the change in my voice, I still have a hard time with it. Even years. It was in 2006, I think. 2006. So, anyway, not too long after that, I left the hospital job, like I said, because of hospital politics. And I signed on with the security company that had worked at the hospital, thinking I was going to still work at the hospital, but in security, because it was a outsourced, contracted security company. But instead, they put me at a nearby factory, which was basically just walking around for fire watch, just to make sure that various warehouses full of old materials didn't catch fire. That job didn't fall through because that factory, they contracted out to a different company at some point, and then the company that I worked for wanted to move me to a place that I couldn't get to because my car was in bad shape. So I quit that. And so then I started working for Sears Roebuck department store, which if you don't know what they are, then you'll never know because they're gone now. They have some internet presence because they're basically just a website. And that's it. They have no stores. Except maybe one in Hawaii or something like that. But I started working for a semi-local Sears store. Did well enough. I was in lawn and garden selling tractors on commission. And then in electronics selling TVs for commission. And that's where I met the girl that I thought, it's not who I'm with now. It's the girl that I thought was going to be the girl that was like the one. She was everything I wanted in a person. We got along great. I was playing in Beneath the Scars, the death metal band, by this time. They had brought me in as a keyboard player, and I had 5 good years minimum playing with them, having a good time. And I met her through that because she was a fan of the band. And she lived in Akron because she was going to school at the university in Akron, Ohio. And things got serious enough that I was like, you know what? I want to spend my days with you. So I left my family, I left my band, I left everybody that I knew here, which was all of my friends, to go to Akron, Ohio, which was at the time 3-ish hours away, give or take. And then the relationship fell apart. There's a lot of components to that I'm not going to get into here. I've since talked with her about it. Since then, you know, we figured out things, but obviously we didn't get back together or anything like that. But, you know, the air got cleared as far as that goes. But I had transferred. When I moved here to be with her, I transferred my Sears store from here to there because they had a Sears store there, and that's where she worked. She worked at a Sears store. And so we worked there, and I worked there for quite a while. I had made a pretty good name for myself until it looked like the store was going to close. And so then there was the breakup, and I was in a bad place for all that because this was a person that I'd given up my entire life for. Everything that I liked to do in my life I'd given up to go out here. And it was during that funk where I met my wife. And that wasn't always easy. I was not always the best person to be with at the time because I had a lot of things going on in my brain. I admit it. I was not the most stable person. You know, I wasn't abusive or anything like that, and I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to defend myself. I've never hit a person that I was with anything like that. I've never been violent. I've never, gone out of my way to be mean to a person that I was with. But I was not an easy person to deal with. I was moody, I was grouchy, I had outbursts. But, we made it work. We eventually moved down here to Canton after a little while because the apartment was just too small for the both of us. It was my apartment that I'd moved into when I first moved out to Akron. And so we bought the house down here. And we have lived here for the last 15 years, give or take. And along those lines, my daughter was born. I left my job at Sears, and I started doing things here at home. And you guys know that part. You folks already know that part because I explained it on the last episode about why I left the regular work life to watch my daughter. I had 2 bands that I played with when we moved here. Tried to, one after the other. And my schedule was not good for either one of them, unfortunately. So I continued to work on my solo stuff. During the course of my time in the apartment in Akron to here is when I started releasing music professionally. My first album, The End of an Era, came out in the apartment after I'd met the woman who was going to be my wife. Then the second album came out in the apartment, and then every album after that, I think, has come out while we've been down in Canton. So most of the major stuff in this portion of my life have all happened down here in Canton, Ohio, including all of this podcast stuff and everything. And while it's not a complete and total concise history of everything that I've done, I know I've had to skip a few things because we're running low on time. That's the bulk of it. There are a few other things that I might talk about in the next episode. I might do like a part 2 expanding on certain things. Because there's interesting things I'd like to talk about, and there's people I'd like to mention who deserve to be mentioned, because they're great people, and they are very important to me. Even if I don't talk to them or see them very often in my life now, they're very important to who I am, and I appreciate them, and I care about them a lot. So I'll probably do a part 2 for this, maybe next time. I can't say next week, because this is always kind of sporadic. But, and I didn't even get to how I started in the radio business. Because there's stories there too. There's stories for that. That's a good story about how I actually started getting into the podcast radio business. Some people know that story and some people don't. I know I talk a lot of garbage about various things on my Facebook about this period, but there's quite a bit to the story. And I'd like to get into it. But I don't want to take too much time for this episode, because I want to keep them close to about an hour, maybe a little bit more, but not too far off of that, because I don't want it to be too far from being digestible. I don't want to lose the attention span of people. You know what I mean? So, but that's History of the Spider Part 1, I guess. When I was your age. History of the Spider Part 1. We'll do another part next time. And we'll talk about some other things too, because I have done other things in the meantime. I watched another WWE event, Money in the Bank, which wasn't, there's not a lot to talk about there, but I could probably review it for you. Maybe we'll do that soon. I don't know. There's a lot. There's a lot still going on. My modern history has a lot to it still that I've barely scratched the surface of. So let's put a pin in it. Let's put a pin in it and talk about that next time. In the meantime, if you could, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Spider Does Things. It's on YouTube. That's where this will end up eventually. I'm always kind of behind schedule on getting these on YouTube, but in the meantime, you can listen to it on Spreaker, on Spotify, on Amazon, on Apple, on wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. But definitely still go to the YouTube and support me there, because that's the nexus of everything I do. Everything ends up on the YouTube eventually. All of my gaming videos, all of my spirits videos, all of my podcasts, everything goes there. And I would appreciate it. Also check out the website ltatm.net. Let's talk about the madness, because I funnel a lot of things through there. It's got access to Big Buff Records, which is doing some big things very soon. Okay, we're getting back to basics on that, and we're going to restructure the company and do some very interesting things with that. My game streams, This Uncanny Earth is there. We're still plugging out new episodes. As of this recording, we have June and July, and then we're going to be off a month in August before the next season, because we moved to a seasonal schedule to prevent burnout and to keep the topics fun, fresh, and interesting. I'm also going to have, in the near future, I'm going to have Rob from Evanescence, who was the writing team for Jack and V. I'm going to have him back on now that I've gone through the book, and now that the book's out in the wild, which it is out in the wild, by the way. You can go buy it now. It's $2.99 on Amazon for Kindle, and I recommend you do that. And write a review if you could. Please write a review, because reviews are super important for for Amazon's algorithm. So give it a. You don't have to give it 5 stars if you really didn't like it, but it would be nice if you gave it a good score. Just for me, your good buddy Spider. Okay, give it a good score. Unless you really hate it, I mean, by all means, whatever you want. Be honest. Don't lie about it, but be nice, please. Be nice. I've given it a good review, so. And so he'll be back on at some point in the very near future to discuss that, and to discuss some other concepts that we've been thinking about the AI landscape and whatnot. So, very interested. And I think that's about it. I've taken up enough of your time. So, I will see you folks next time. Have a good night.